Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Scrum Down NBC Sports Rugby Podcast. I am your host with the most, Alex Corbicero, and it is great to be back, everyone. Lots to unpack and talk about, and this week's episode, it is back to Six Nations here on NBC Sports. We have all three games available live and on demand with Peacock TV, but then also covering all three on CNBC with myself and Brian Hightower, who will be in studio and to preview those games. And we got a lot of good feedback after last week's episode with Ross Hamilton on, performance and analyst, who does a lot of the prep work for the TV broadcast and analyzes all the numbers of these Six Nations teams, is on again to give us really the previews and how these teams match up from the numbers. I pick his brain, ask questions, give feedback there as well, and give my thoughts on things as he's breaking down the numbers to me. I think it's a really good, insightful, and a great way to preview these weekend's games. And then, as it's the LA Sevens also this weekend across on NBC Sports, that is available live and on demand with Peacock TV, but then also airing highlights on CNBC. We have USA Rugby's Joe Schroeder on to talk over that, to preview it, what's coming up, but also preview the launch of the Pioneers 3, which is the HSBC sponsored documentary that's been following the men and women's teams this year. The men's episode is called The Dogs, DAWGS, and the women's is called Brave. This follows them from the last event of 2020, just before COVID happened, all the way through the pandemic, up to the run-in and in the Tokyo Olympics. It really is a special behind-the-scenes look into everything going on in there. Some amazing stories to see these incredibly diverse groups come together and get to see how they actually act away from the field is very insightful, and it actually debuts on NBC Sports YouTube page, which, if you're watching this in video, is the same page that you're watching on now at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Really good watching to get you in the mood for the LA Sevens. But now let's get into our Six Nations preview with Ross Hamilton. And we are joined by the returning Ross Hamilton. Ross, thanks for coming back on it again, mate. Last week's episode went down a treat with everyone, with the numbers and some of the detail. And we thought you'd get you back this week as round 3 of the Six Nations is upon us to preview some of the games this weekend. But first off, how you doing, mate?
Yes, thank you, mate. Thanks for having me back again. I enjoyed it last week and looking forward to this week. It's good to preview some of the games this weekend and show some of the insights of how the teams might play, the styles that they've been employing so far.
It's absolutely fascinating. Obviously, with NBC, we get your sort of, your packs with loads of detail and information from the matchups to the style of play to everything. So I think getting a chance to share some of that to our wider listener group, especially before match day and the build-up as well, which I think is it will be fascinating for fans. So let's start with the opening game. You've got Ireland and Italy going at it. I think Ireland's going to maybe not have a Johnny Sexton. There's going to be a few potential changes, but it also looks like some big names coming back into the fold from fitness in the front row with Cian Healy, Dan Sheehan back in the mix as well. Still no Tyg Furlong from my understanding. But, what do you make of the game this weekend?
One of the big things to me that I was looking at, and as you say, there's so much data available, almost beyond the sort of the playing stats, but had a look at the scoring profiles about when the teams are scoring their points and how their sort of game progresses throughout the 80 minutes. And I thought it was quite interesting that Italy have a positive points difference in the second half so far. They've played England and France, and I think you could see in both of those games watching them, they've really come back into those games. Might have expected France and then England to take that lead away, but they didn't. And Italy really came back into it. And we might see something a little bit similar this weekend because Ireland have scored the most points and have the best points difference in the first half. So yes, they're going to start strong, and we might see that at half-time perhaps a little bit of a lead. But they're not quite so strong in the second half, maybe down to some of that fitness or lack of power off the bench or personnel slightly different, although they've still been impressive. But you never know. We could still see Italy coming back into this game in the second half.
It's fascinating because the problem with Ireland is they're so clinical in the first half that a lot of the time, by half-time, the job is 2/3 of the way done. And so then you ask the question, can they go, if there's a team that can actually match them in that first half, what do Ireland do in the second half is probably one of the big question marks I've been waiting to see, because I do feel like they've 3 tries. I think both times they've been up at half time. Only 1 try needed to get the bonus point, and that second half hasn't quite had the same intensity.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, you could argue the first 20 minutes really against Wales, that's all they needed. And I mean, that's hard to keep your foot on the gas, right? When pretty much game is done and you've got the team that they've got, it must be hard to keep that going, knowing they're probably going to win that match. But, what if that is the case? If Italy come out in this first half and they shock Ireland a little bit, they might have the staying power in the second half, as we've shown, and maybe Ireland haven't, and they certainly haven't needed to prove that so far. You sort of almost get out of practice and detrain if you don't do those things. So if Italy can start fast, then yeah, we never know.
Game on. And I think with the Italians, like, what have you seen different from them in this Six Nations, statistically, the previous ones of from the data or the style of play or what you're seeing from them?
One of the big things I sort of looked at, and whether this was a tactical shift, Italy, in the past, perhaps a little bit too open, too free-flowing and making too many errors, and then they cough up possession turnovers and then concede tries from that point of view. Haven't been doing that so much this one, and perhaps reverting a little bit to a set piece, a little bit more discipline, a little bit more focused game plan, whether that's working or not, still not winning games. Maybe they're performing better. But I just had a look at some of their tries. All of their tries have been from set piece. So far, they've won the second most scrums and the most lineouts overall. Their success isn't the best, but it's up there. But it's sort of giving them that platform to launch from. And we haven't necessarily seen that from Italy. We see them living off scraps and things like that in the past. So is that a tactical change? And is that something that Kieran Crowley has brought in for them? I don't know. It certainly looks that way. And that could be a great platform. We might get onto this with England later, with Borthwick coming in. Maybe that's a platform that they're now starting from, and they can build off that. Whether it reaps the rewards in this tournament, yet to see. But that could be a really good starting platform for them to launch their attack from.
And from Ireland, they seem to have quite a mixed source of where they score their tries from. Maybe that first game was a little set piece heavy against Wales, but then a bit more variety against France. Where have Italy been leaking their points, and where does that sort of match up? Because I know you usually pick those things pretty well.
Yeah, the Ireland one especially is something I saw. Yes, you're right. They scored more tries from broken play than they have set piece across the tournament so far. Again, we would typically associate Ireland very pragmatic, set piece focused, get down the pitch, sort of set up their platforms and go from there. But more willing to score and play from anywhere. They've scored as many tries from outside of their own half as they have from inside the opposition half. So they are happy to take the ball in a turnover situation and go and play. One thing I did notice, and whether Gibson Park is back fit or not, I don't think he is this weekend, but I have seen that Ireland have significantly dropped off their ruck speed. They are typically number one in any tournament they play by a mile, and yet they're third so far in this competition. Whilst that's interesting that Gibson Park isn't playing and their ruck speed has dropped, I think it also does show, though, that they are capable of scoring tries and winning matches without that, which, again, in a weird way, is almost more daunting that they could do it either way. They can play pragmatically, get down the pitch, get a kick from a turnover, go and break one line break and go and score a try the length of the field. And Hugo Keenan's try being a great example where a lot of people talked about it, almost setting up a transition play into a set piece. Everybody was in the same page. Caelan Doris made that first carry, and then they had everybody off of the same page that was prescribed for Keenan to go through that and score. So doing things a little different, still incredible, and again, perhaps daunting that they can do that. Both just normally, quick ball, butt off the cuff, they have both aspects.
All right, Ross, and from a ruck speed point of view, what about Italy, and how are they looking in the competition in that aspect?
Well, Italy themselves have the fastest ruck speed in the tournament. So where we associate that with Ireland, you might think that of France. It's Italy with the fastest ruck speed of any team in the competition. Now, their problem perhaps is that they're not using that and converting to disorganize the defense enough to make line breaks and meters and therefore tries. But it's there, and it's something that is there. And if they can keep stressing Ireland's defense, then they have the opportunity to convert. On the flip side of that, they allow their opposition the fastest ruck speed. So in defense, they don't necessarily control that well enough. And a stat that I just wanted to get across because it's quite exceptional. is that they give their opposition 50% of all of their rucks are under 2 seconds.
Wow.
That is mad. I mean, if you're getting 20%, 25% of your rucks under 2 seconds, that's really good, and you're going to stress some teams. So if Italy are allowing their opposition half of all of their rucks being that speed, there's no way they're going to be able to ever get set long enough, quick enough to be able to manage attacks. And then maybe this is the weekend that Ireland bring that ruck speed back, because Italy aren't threatening the breakdown at all, and they could be in real danger.
No, agree, mate. And I think even with Ireland's ruck speed, just to wrap that up, they did play a Welsh team, which, did slow them down a little bit there, and a French team. And I'm imagining teams from a defensive point of view, that's what they focus probably so much on when they play Ireland, is slow them down, slow them down. So it could also be a symptom of Ireland being that good there, that teams are actually finding a way to slow them down a little bit from maybe where we've seen them in the autumn or in 2022.
Really good point. Teams develop, and of course they do this kind of analysis as well. They'll have access to these kind of numbers, so they'll see that silent threats. Wouldn't need a rocket scientist to tell you that, but yeah, they can slow Ireland down. They'll put a big focus on that, and maybe they've done that so far. Maybe Italy won't have quite so much luck.
And I think Italy have a surprising bit of physicality as well, which is what's surprising, that they've given up so much ruck speed, is they actually have quite a few big tacklers, big hitters in their team. So, I'm sure that'll be an area of focus for them this weekend. But I think that wraps up Ireland, Italy pretty well. And now we can transition to the next game of the weekend, which is a big one. A lot of off-field distractions going on as such. But England v Wales in Cardiff. What do you make of this one?
Yeah, lots going on. I think you can guarantee that no matter what, if the game gets played, which I'm sure it will, the Welsh team will be up for it against an England side, of course. One big thing that I sort of noticed in terms of the matchup between them, looking at how England have perhaps changed their style a little bit where they can under Borthwick so far, a lot more set-piece focus, back to basics, as Borthwick did with Leicester, as we mentioned last week. And unfortunately for Wales, that might be their biggest area of weakness. Defending lineouts within their own 22, give away a lot of penalties, so they allow teams into those areas a lot as well. So if England do stick with that and stick with their lineout focus and just going to maul and drive them over, then they could get a lot of success versus Wales, which I'm sure Welsh players and fans won't appreciate. They'll never like being beaten up by an English side.
Absolutely. And then, what do you make of England as well, and how the teams match up? Like, what are the key stats to look at from England as they face Wales?
For me, we touched on it a little bit last week and at the start of this, is yes, they're going back to basics. So they've won the most lineouts overall. They've not lost a single scrum so far. The three teams have done that, though. But they have the best discipline, which are fantastic stats to get in any kind of competition and at this level with the teams that they're facing. I guess you might say, and I might say, that they haven't necessarily done enough with that, whether that is because Borthwick and England just want to do the basics first and they'll build later, and that may come. And that may be something that we as English fans have to sort of deal with, that it's not going to be an overnight fix and they're going to set the world alight. But they're very much focused on that kind of game. They have the second best collision success and the best gain line success in their carries, and yet they don't make many line breaks, offloads, meters made. They're not sort of converting that. Their ruck speed is the second slowest. So there's two sides of that. You think, well, they've got one element, they should be able to add the rest, but maybe it is just that one element they're focusing on at the start and they can build the rest. If that is going to be enough, whether that's enough against Wales, obviously we'll wait and see, but they certainly have their basics there in place for me for England.
Yeah, when I look at England, like, the foundations are being built. Like, Borthwick, nothing could be built overnight. And Borthwick's obviously got a clear, slight direction change with how he wants to take this England team. And you're just seeing slight more development and layers from week to week. This team's going to be a very good team, I think, by the time they get to the World Cup, with the amount of time he's going to have with them. Right now, you're kind of scrambling to get sort of your processes in place to be able to play Test match rugby in a couple of weeks, which is crazy. From a new coach turnover point of view, with the amount of change they have in back staff as well. And so for me, it's how do they keep growing? And like I said, being more productive with ball in hand is a massive one. And there's some question marks, like, does George Ford come back in the mix? He's in the training squad this week. Does he need a bit more time? to be decided. And then you've got, last week you talked on a bit about defensively, they are not winning the gain line or losing those meters, not like they're making an attack. Now you have the potential return of a Courtney Laws, a potential return of a Tom Curry, two guys that are real sort of enforcers of that defensive gain line for England. Could that make a difference this weekend v Wales?
Well, that's such a good point, Coles, because some of the stats I looked at as well, that we talked about sort of defensive ruck speed, offensive ruck speed. England slow their opposition down the second most, would suggest, therefore, that they would have a good defensive line they could get off. They could then manage their opposition attack. However, they're the worst tackle success. They've conceded the most post-contact meters and the second most line breaks. So if that was standalone stat, that's poor. If that's a stat linked with the fact that they're actually slowing their opposition down and yet they're still conceding those, that's perhaps a real worry. Whether that's structural, whether that's some coaching things, but whether that's Kevin Sinfield not having the time to implement his game plan in there, and maybe there's some confusion with game plans changing in the last few weeks, perhaps. But yes, you bring in those two guys, Courtney Laws and Tom Curry, two of the best to do it, British and Irish Lions. Maybe that solves it by itself. You never know. But there are certainly some areas that they would want to work on there, whether that's as a team or if it's the individuals.
No, it's fascinating. And then, what about Wales? They've only scored 2 tries in this competition, I believe, so far. They've had a lot of possession. They've had a lot of entries to the 22. What are you making them from a numbers point of view in attack?
Well, as you're saying there, my point was going to be their efficiency, and not just in the red zone. I mean, efficiency across the board of their attack, their defense, and yes, taking chances. We'll start with efficiency, red zone efficiency, as we talked about it. They're the second most entries. They have the second most phases played in the opposition 22, and yet dead last for efficiency in terms of conversion into points and scores. And just to give that a bit of context, France are the second worst team at the moment in terms of red zone efficiency, so points per entry and the success rate. But France, in second worst, are 3 times more efficient than Wales in last. Wales average 0.9 points per entry, France 2.6. Wales average 15% of their entries converted into a score of some kind. France are at 43. So nearly 3 times better than the worst team. So that's how far Wales are off of the second worst team. So just nowhere near the kind of level. But that also translates into both their attack in general and their defence. They do have a lot of possession, you say. And maybe this is a point of hope for Wales. These are some positives. They obviously need to link it all together. But they have the second most post-contact meters of anyone. They have the second fastest ruck speed. There are things there that are in place, and they can utilise those, but they're not at the moment. They have the second fewest line breaks, the fewest defenders beaten, the second most turnovers conceded, and the fewest points and tries, as you said. So there are things in place. There are things there. Maybe some positives, maybe a slight ray of hope. Not too much, though. They're not doing a lot with it.
It really is, fascinating. And I think if you look at both of these teams when they've played, both have had quite a lot of possession and quite a lot of, holding the ball in the middle of the field, getting the entries, maybe not the line breaks or the tries, but it'll be fascinating who probably controls the game, who has the ball more, who defends more on the weekend.
It's sort of why I thought about that first point with England, how they're going back to basics. Exactly that, is that if that's what this game comes down to, which is possibly most likely will, then if England can get themselves in the 22, set up some line outs, get their maul game going. England have scored 7 of 8 of their tries inside the opposition 22. So they're not playing from far out. They're not making line breaks and scoring from everywhere like we've seen with, say, Scotland, for example, but they're going to that game plan. So if that's how it works out, maybe England have the upper hand. And the last bit I mentioned, sort of defensive efficiency for Wales as well. Similarly, they've got a slight ray of hope, but it's not panning out too well for them. They're the most dominant tackles in the tournament so far. The second most turnovers won, so they're able to stop their opposition. They conceded the fewest post-contact meters as well, but they conceded the most points. So those things are there, they're in place. Maybe they are their building blocks to be able to build on and for Warren Gatland to develop. And maybe they're not that far away. They're not quite managing to put all of it together at the moment.
That makes a fascinating encounter. And it is the question mark. If Wales wake up and start actually taking some of these chances with England's missed tackles and some of the other areas, TBD how that one can go. I think a lot of it will go down to the actual day and the performance, which is, what makes the Six Nations so special. But let's look ahead to the final game of the weekend. And this one probably has the most implications of the tournament big picture and the most question marks of how Scotland will fare in Paris. And after their first ever 2 wins in a row since, I believe, 1996, in the Six Nations. Well, it was 5 nations then, but Six Nations now. First ever in the Six Nations era. Is this a team that is equipped to go and be successful in Paris from the numbers point of view?
Huge question, isn't it? Hard one to answer. One of the ones I looked at straight away, and we looked at this for Italy, Ireland as well, was the scoring profile. France, the best starters, might say, in the tournament so far. They have the most points scored and the best points difference in the first 20 minutes. But from there, for the next 60 minutes until the end of the game, they have a negative points difference overall. So yes, they're starting well, and that got them enough to beat Italy in the first round. It certainly didn't, obviously, against Ireland. However, if we look at Scotland, they haven't conceded a single point in the first quarter. 3 of the 4 quarters of the game, they've conceded the fewest points overall, and they have scored the most points in the second half of games. So we might see France going out, not necessarily to an early lead, but starting strong. Scotland might be able to contain that so far based off the data that we've got, and they might also then be able to do something in the second half and take the game away from France, and not something that France have had to deal with or have managed well so far in the competition. So just in that element, the profile of the game as we've seen so far, Scotland certainly looked pretty good to me from that.
And, when I've looked at a lot of your packs for these teams, neither team seems to have much possession in games. They do kick a lot. Do you expect to be a lot of kicking this weekend with the way it looks, with both teams maybe so far been operating with minimal possession, but being quite efficient with what they have on the field?
Yeah, and there's 2 sides of that. It's a great question. It's slightly different for Scotland and for France. And I'll start with Scotland, actually, because they kicked the most in the tournament. They kicked the most kick meters. Finn Russell's kicked a lot of his possession, and of the kicks he's made, 74% of those are for territory, which is not necessarily something we'll think about associate to Finn Russell. He's the attacking kicker in the crossfields, which he's done, but majority of them are those territory ones, those game control ones, and that's certainly something that they've added into their game. And I was perhaps a little bit, not negative, but maybe talking about how risky Scotland could be last week with you on the pod. And that if they don't get their conversions right, then they might be struggling. But we could give them the credit maybe that they deserve, is that they are playing in the right areas. They don't necessarily need quick ruck speed. They have the slowest of anyone in the tournament, but they're playing in the right areas. They are making line breaks in the right areas, and they're converting them straight away. What that does entail, though, is that they don't have the ball very, very often, as you said, and they give it to their opposition. So therefore, they've had to make the most tackles, but they've missed the fewest. They have the best tackle success. So if you were any other team, if you were a France team in this case with Sean Edwards as defence coach, you think that's a fantastic game plan. Kick the ball away, don't make any errors, back your defence, don't make any errors, get the ball back and then score straight away. That's a fantastic way of playing the game. Perhaps we haven't given Scotland, perhaps I haven't given Scotland the credit they deserve in that instance. And then sort of on the flip side for France, haven't had that much ball, but what they do with it is attack immediately, very, very quickly. Again, sort of opposite to Scotland in that they're not trying to play risk averse by kicking it away. What they do with it, they just do immediately, make line breaks, score tries. They have the second lowest possession time in carries, as you said, but the second most meters made, the most line breaks, the most defenders beaten, the most offloads. So you sort of can't correlate those 2 things. They don't have the ball, and yet that's just an absolute number, not relative to their possession. They're still making those kind of inroads in attack. And the final one for a France point of view, just to show the contrast of those 2 things, is they have the 5th fastest average ruck speed, so second slowest, and yet they have the most rucks under 2 seconds as a percentage of their possession. So I was trying to sort of work that out. Like, how does that come about? And it just because when France are slow and they kick the ball away, they are slow. When they come alive and they attack, it's lightning. And those rucks are under 2 seconds for the majority of that possession that they're attacking when they get their success. If they don't, goes back slow again, they might kick the ball away. but it's when they want to, they can just flick it on. So they might not need much possession, they might not need those carries, but when they have it in the right areas, they can really go.
And sometimes when you see teams like this matched up, discipline can play a huge factor. And I think in round one, France's discipline was terrible, and Scotland's was incredible. How did they fare in round two, and how are they looking sort of statistically in that as we get towards the game this weekend?
Yeah, France are poor discipline-wise. Scotland perhaps middle of the pack over the two games so far as an average per game. It was something I sort of thought about in terms of more a defensive point of view, but leads to discipline and especially penalties conceded at breakdowns and things for France, is perhaps that they are tiring. Similarly, we said with Ireland, that teams have associated that their ruck speed gets them their success. Okay, what's so good about France? Huge men, massive collision winners, those kind of things. But where's the weakness in that? And perhaps their levels of fitness, and they can't move around the pitch so much. So when teams have had the ball against them, they are keeping them and they are forcing France to make a lot of tackles. The second most tackles, with Scotland making the most. And then off the back of that, France have made the fewest dominant tackles. They've conceded the most meters and the second most entries into their 22. So does that come down to the fact that they're tiring a little bit? Are they making these discipline errors down to their fatigue, that they're actually being asked to defend far more than they have been before? Maybe that's something that Sean Edwards, as their defensive coach, hasn't sort of factored for, or again, teams have identified and a way to beat France down. So some differing styles there that we've seen, and maybe some tests that France haven't encountered before.
And then how are these teams holding up in the set piece? Because I think, obviously accuracy in attack is going to be massive. Like, who can contain who in defense? We've just talked about discipline a little bit, and we've talked about the kicking game. Last thing that probably tips this one way or the other is a set piece sort of. How are the stats for both teams set piece?
Yes, quite interesting actually, and specifically for Scotland. Scotland have the best line-out success in the tournament so far, but they have the worst scrum success. So something there may be not adding up, but perhaps not too much of a problem, because their focus from tries is line-outs. They have scored the most tries in the competition from a line-out as the original source. So if that is their focus, they are certainly playing towards that. They average winning 14, 15 line-outs per game. So they give themselves a huge amount of platforms to launch from their set piece, of which they work well with, being their line-outs. France is slightly different. Not the greatest line-out success in total. I mentioned they've actually scored more tries from broken play than set piece across the tournament so far. So the whole thing isn't necessarily their focus. And although they have 100% scrum success so far in the tournament, they've only had 3 scrums in total across both games. So they don't have the platform that they want to launch from. They don't have potentially that many opportunities where they could even sort of scrum for penalties. Just don't have that many scrums to work from. So a little bit mixed between the two. Probably say that on balance there that Scotland may have the upper hand, because their strength in their line-out is their focus, of which they are converting from, whereas France is a little bit all over the place.
Fascinating. I think scrum will be a good battle, because Scotland have a deceptively actually solid scrum, even though maybe their stats don't line it up. But from a size, technical, what's going on there, I think at least the starting packs, I feel, will be a bit of a stalemate. I'd be surprised if someone gets the edge on someone. So maybe France without Antonio could be a little different, but for me, it's later in the games that I wonder with Scotland. I think their bench scrum hasn't looked as strong. That's where England got a penalty or two near the end. That's a factor that could play into it. And then the last question I was potentially going to ask you, which I think is a fascinating set piece stat, is penalties given up at the set piece. So not one, but conceding. Do you have any stats on that?
Yes, fairly even in total. They've both conceded 1 penalty from scrums. Scotland have conceded a penalty on their own scrum, and then France have conceded a penalty on their opposition scrum. Haven't lost a scrum, as we mentioned. So you'll know better than me, Corbs, you need to describe sort of the difference between those and the different kind of pressures. But as we said, France don't have that many scrums in the first place. So there is a chance that they may attack the opposition, but that is where they gave away their penalty.
Yeah, I just think it's always a massive swing of games, and it doesn't always get talked. We always talk about like scrum success, but you don't always talk about opposition, like when you're defending at set piece success and how many penalties you're giving up or how many they're getting. Because to me, those swing games, I made a career out of helping those swing games, but it gets you, anywhere from 25 to 40 meters of territory or field position, gets you an entry to the 22. It gets you 3 points on the board. If there is a mismatch of those areas, it all of a sudden starts skewing the game one way because it affects the stats in a different way from same as meters or line breaks or whatever, or entries to the 22. Those penalties are a gateway to that in my mind as well.
Yeah, agree. You're absolutely right. As you say, those penalties are as good as field position because they are going to give you that 20 to 40 to 50 meters or so. You're absolutely spot on, yeah.
And I think that'll be, fascinating on a whole which way this game goes. Like, can Scotland still bring that accuracy to Paris? Will Sean Edwards-D be able to withstand that, nullify it, or will Scotland be able to weather a French storm and still take their shots? Probably sums up all we've just talked about in this last 10 minutes.
Yeah, a fascinating match to watch. And I mean, genuinely, as we're showing from a lot of the stats, Scotland have a chance, a real chance. They're away from home. It's very, very tough. Second best team in the world, rebounding from an Ireland loss. I'm sure France will come back strongly. But if we touch on that efficiency to finish, France is second worst in this tournament so far. Scotland are well away the best across anybody. So they definitely have a chance at the very least. And it could be a fascinating game.
And that's the thing, big picture-wise. If Scotland win this game, they then go back to Edinburgh knowing Ireland have got to come to them. And the tournament could be on the line there. They've got their last game of Italy, and they're thinking, lads, 2 more big games, and this could be our year. So it really is. There's so much at stake in that game for me because France have dropped one now. They'll hope to swing it back so that maybe hope that England or Scotland can beat Ireland. But if Scotland win, mate, put the gears in. They are in the driver's seat for the first time like ever, and it'd be a fascinating way it goes down as their squad is the best it's ever been. Like the most developed, the most world-class players at one time I think they've ever had, the most cohesion, and they've found a bit of a style and identity from the autumn maybe through here that's starting to really work for them.
You're sounding like all of my Scottish mates who get carried on this hype train trying to win the Grand Slam, but you could well be right. That's what's so great about it. You could be right.
Well, that's what's wild. Usually they beat England and then the hype train happens and they drive themselves off a cliff. We're so far so good, but there could be a massive cliff in France so they just send themselves off. So it'll be an interesting one which way it goes, mate. But Ross, I got to thank you again for coming on the pod. Like the insight, the numbers, the detail, the back and forth that we get to do. I know a lot of our fans really appreciate it. Got a lot of messages after last week. So thanks again for your time and insights. And again, thanks again for all you do for our broadcast for NBC, giving us those packs and helping us prepare our analysis as well.
Yeah, pleasure, mate. Thank you again for having me on. I love doing it. Love chatting about rugby.
Definitely, man. I don't think it'll be the last time the Six Nations. So take care of yourself, mate. We'll speak soon.
Cheers, buddy.
So good to have Ross on. Just amazing numbers, insight. Gets me giddy as a rugby nose myself. So fascinating to see sort of what you see with your eyes and maybe your analysis coming together with the numbers and backed up by data. Fantastic. And I think that's something we'll have to continue through this pod during the Six Nations, especially. And now it's time to get into our interview with USA Rugby's Joe Schroeder. Reminder as well, Pioneers 3 is coming out on NBC Sports YouTube page this Friday, 6 p.m. Pacific time in the United States, 9 p.m. Eastern time, as well as the LA Sevens coming up this weekend. Let's get into our interview with Joe. And we are joined by, he's not a member of Top Gun, but, member of the USA Rugby Sevens, one of their standouts as well. Joe Schroeder, welcome to the Scrum Down, mate.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Alex. Excited to be here.
It's good, mate. And I guess for those that are just listening, can't see or get my gags, which are never the greatest anyway, but I still roll with them. You've got a nice pair of shiny shades on, mate. What exactly is going on here?
Just Top Gun came out, so just rocking my Maverick look right now. But no, I picked up a nice little shiner in training, so just covering some.
Yeah. Can't let the fans see you like that, mate. Need a bit of time on the ice and to heal. But mate, the reason we got you on is, well, twofold. But the real reason is that LA Sevens this weekend, which is available live and on demand on Peacock TV across America. There'll be highlights airing on CNBC over the weekend as well. And I think if we focus on Team USA, very important year for you guys with Olympic qualification on the line, and it is absolutely tight in a dead heat. If you look there, you guys had some very a strong start, but then all of a sudden drop from, I think, third, where you were sitting, all the way down to seventh, but you're only 2 points off third. Like, how important is this weekend just from an Olympic qualification point of view before we get on to home field and all that stuff?
This is like the middle of the season, exact center. I mean, this tournament will set the standard for the rest of the season. So it's pretty big. It's very close. I think we were actually second. We dropped to seventh. I mean, it's been 5 different tournaments, 5 different tournament winners. It's just a really competitive season. I haven't really seen the series like this before. So it's been exciting, tough, challenging, all those things.
It's been an exciting one, and it's been a season of growth for you guys. I think from last year to this year, look much more competitive. Some key players back in the mix, but also some lesser experienced guys who probably benefited last year from time in the saddle starting to come for fruition for you guys. What have you made of the season on a whole?
Well, we'll figure out how much we've made of the season, when we get near the end. But we're off. I mean, like we said, it's highly contested. We're really close. We've really built on last season, where, like you said, we've had some new guys kind of rebuilt after the Olympic year, and now that we feel like we've meshed a little bit, got some experience from last season, and now we're trying to push things a bit more and try to get that top 4. And I think, for the most part, it's been going pretty well. Had a hiccup in Sydney, and hopefully we can turn that around this upcoming weekend to LA, which we are all very excited to get out on the home soil and play in front of family, friends, and fans and everything.
And what were the lessons learned from Sydney going into this next run of tournaments?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just simple, just individual execution and how pivotal it is in a 7s match as opposed to a 15s. It's just like one thing can snowball on to the other. We all have to be on top of our game. Maybe we had a game plan, but we didn't get to maybe, execute it because we just kept letting little things fall and we never got the ball, or, we were just giving the possession back, and, we're a possession team. And that's kind of how we operate. So we've kind of been working on that and just really gearing up for this tough pool we have coming up for us in LA, which we always end up having a tough pool in the home tournament. So nothing we're not used to.
And you touched on it briefly, but how excited are you to play on home soil? Not just like the team, but you yourself. I'm sure your family, you get to play in front of family members. People get to come out. Like, what does it mean to you out there?
Yeah, this, people always ask me my favorite tournament, and, I'm saying, I always say barring the, LA tournament, I'll say another, but it's always LA because exactly, it's like the one time of the year my friends and family actually get to see me play live. So, and that's the case for all of us. So it just means everything. We want to go out there and actually show, our supporters in person, because usually the rest of the year they'll be watching through a screen. Well, this is the chance they get to see us live, and so we really want to show how hard we've been working. So it just means a lot to all of us.
That's awesome. And then, you yourself, just a little bit, your journey in rugby, you had quite a unique sort of finding of rugby. I know it gets referenced a lot on like the stats, but you were in sort of competitive cheerleading before you sort of found rugby and got here and are now an Olympian as such. And can you just talk a little bit about all of that?
Yeah, no, that's right. Played rugby in high school, and then decided to study engineering in college, and I picked up cheerleading, and then got back into rugby. And yeah, so I went from getting lifted in the line out to, well, now lifting people in cheerleading, and now I'm back to getting thrown back up in the line out. So it's been pretty fun. It's been interesting. Yeah, kind of I don't know, pathway life, I guess. I found rugby again after college, and one thing kind of spiraled into the other, and I was able to get a chance to travel for the sevens team. So and now I've been out here for a few years. So try to make the most of it, take nothing for granted. I've been loving it. It is funny that, I have that cheerleading past history. I still keep up to date with a couple of them, my coach and everything. So, but yeah, it's just interesting path and story for sure.
Awesome. And I really think you've started to establish yourself as like a main fixture in the team from, your work in the air, which kickoffs are a huge part of sevens, but also sort of some of the loose play, the offloads, the link play. Talk a little bit about your development, but also having someone like Coach Ben Pinkelman to work with, who I think also brought a lot of those attributes to his game. Having someone like that maybe help sit over you and help develop you.
Yeah, no. When I first came out here, and I had been up and down, injuries or making squads, not making squads, it's kind of inconsistent and not getting game time or whatnot. And I just kind of figured out, the guys on the team, and this is kind of what I was told as well, they're the making squad, and they're the ones differentiating themselves. And so what differentiates me? Well, you kind of just touched on it, is just being an aerialist. Line out, restart guy, commanding those aspects of the game, as well as the breakdown, which, I've played with Pinky. Now he coaches us, and he's just, was a world-class player. He's a world-class coach, very kind of like, willing to like just work with us and figure out how each of us operate, and then use that to our benefit. Cause he knows I'm tall and lanky. I can't get as low as him. He's so flexible, but he's just kind of, helped me, figure out how to use that, my height in the breakdown, and use it use it to help me in this different situation. So it's awesome having him as an assistant coach. It's really helped all of us.
And then lastly, it's the run into the LA Sevens, but also the release of the Pioneers 3, Your Boys episode, The Dogs. It all comes out on Friday evening on NBC Sports YouTube page. Storm is coming, but I'm prepared. But don't be scared. Right now,
we've been talking about it for so long. We've been waiting for this year, and now the year is just finally here.
Every day we come here, we train, we grind away our lives for 9-10 months of the year. And then every 4 years we get an opportunity to really represent.
You feel like you're playing for more than yourself, because everyone just comes together and everyone is like repping the USA.
Well, it means everything. It's my entire adult life has been striving to be the best that I can in this jersey. So since I was 18 years old, I've been trying to put this jersey on, and it means everything to me. I don't know anything else.
I remember watching minimal TV growing up, but when we did, it was the Olympics. Take me back to my childhood, and seeing all those great athletes on TV and feeling like I'm one of them is honestly just a huge accomplishment. Like, a reward,
For the record, I'm done trying to make y'all comfortable. That's right. For the record, you ain't trying to grow, then it's done for you. That's right. For the record, lab on me going all the way. All the way. For the record, ain't trying to link, no time to waste. Stop. For the record.
It's a special moment when you get to go out with the girls that you train with every day and represent your country, represent something bigger than yourself, and do it for like the generations to come and put some faith into them.
For the record, I'm done trying to make y'all comfortable. That's right. For the record, you ain't trying to grow, then it's done for you. Wait. For the record, ain't trying to link, no time to waste. Stop. For the record, for the record, yeah. For the record.
Talk a bit what it was like maybe having that follow you and why people should check in and tune into those episodes.
It's just gonna show you an even deeper side to all of us, why we're really out here grinding, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish in America for rugby sevens, and just how we're trying to grow the game, and it'll just show you the other side of us, because well, the guy, the cameraman Bruce, he does an excellent job and has just been phenomenal in kind of capturing that side of us, and so it's something you won't see. You'll see the off the pitch antics, and I'm sure you'll learn a thing or two, and it's exciting to see. And again, it's all about what we're trying to accomplish here in America.
Agreed, mate. Well, you've got a big weekend this weekend in America to get those home fans cheering, and we wish you all the luck, and thanks again for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me, Alex. It's been fun.
Real good to have Joe on. Laid-back guy, funny, good personality, and good to get a little insight for him as we build towards the LA Sevens. But that is a wrap on this week's show. Thank you to everyone for watching or listening. We really appreciate all the support. Keep an eye on our social media channels as well, as we'll be promoting these episodes. We really appreciate all the likes, favorites, shares, retweets, telling your friends, spreading the noise. Scrum Down-aholics out there, I appreciate you all. Thanks again. Bye for now, and we'll see you next week.